Fred, I'm going to start with you because you started us off this afternoon. So thinking about the world through the lens of Bayes and British industrial performance, jobs, competitivity, what I think I know is an awful lot of that automotive output is for export. Despite the fact that I've raised this a number of times with David Wong, I do want an Aston Martin. I don't have one, and there doesn't appear to be any realistic prospect of me getting one. So I'm guessing here you're as interested in the international regulatory environment and development of the connected and autonomous, particularly driverless technology, as you are with what's going on in this country. I mean, presumably, what happens in the rest of the world matters more to you than what's going on here. Is that the case?
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely right. I mean, the trade and cooperation agreement, for example, with the European Union, to ensure that we have tariff-free trade in the auto industry with the EU, we need to have the right amount of local content in terms of our the batteries in our kind of electric vehicles. So my job is intrinsically international in that the work we do to build a supply chain in the UK and ensure enough of that content is sort of UK made to be able to avoid those tariffs is completely contingent on the trade agreement that we have and what those markets are kind of looking for. So that, I would say, is actually the biggest challenge I have in my role, is trying to get enough gigafactories into this country and cathode and anode manufacturers as well, so that we look right down the sort of supply chain as well as then internationally. Some of the other things we struggle with, or sort of struggle with, but opportunities at the same time, are the other trade agreements we're doing across the world. So CPTPP with Japan, with Australia, New Zealand, are some of the kind of landmark free trade agreements the government has done. And with all of those partner countries, I have to be thinking about the OEMs, some of whom are in this room, and exactly how they're going to be able to access the benefits of being able to export, as well as our domestic consumers and production.
But what's intriguing me to an extent, and by the rest of the panel, I've got questions for you, right? So I don't think you got off. But I'm just thinking of those other markets, and from conversations I've had, I sort of feel if I was doing your job, I would be in a slightly cold sweat about batteries and our ability to generate batteries for vehicles from here to go elsewhere, because everyone's trying to decarbonise, electric cars, absolutely. I'm not getting quite such a sense that unless the vehicles produced here can operate themselves, it's quite such an export issue. What's the balance look like from your desk?
So, I mean, on the battery side, you're right in that the global competition is unbelievably fierce, and I probably spend a good third of my kind of hours in the office speaking with potential investors and trying to sway them to come to this country rather than an alternative location. And the reality is that there will be some big keystone investments in gigafactories, which are important in dragging that kind of supply chain kind of along with it. So it's really keystone and fundamental. That, I would say, is a building block then to thinking about CAM and the applications you have there, which are less at the minute a kind of trading issue internationally and more about a regulation issue, as we've many of the kind of presenters commented. Okay,
thank you. I'll get your sense on this, David, because you and I have talked about both the electrification and the connected and the automated worlds. And again, it seems to me that from a UK perspective, the electrification is sort of top of that tree at the moment, with other things coming along, nice to have. They might be coming faster than we expected or slower than we expected, as we heard this morning. But if you've got the ideal opportunity, you've got the director here right next to you, is that hierarchy of anxiety the right one, or are they more parallel?
So I'll say two things to that. So firstly, yes, electrification is right at the top of the agenda, simply because in the internal combustion engine, everybody knows, is the burning platform. Yeah. So the chief executive of a very well-known and large car company in September last year at the International Motor Show in Munich, basically said that, well, electric vehicles will happen, but the game changer is smart mobility, meaning connected and automated vehicles. Who am I to challenge him? I will not challenge him, but my 2 pence worth is that, yes, smart cars are going to be the game changer, but you need electrification to stay in the game in the first instance before you can change the game. So electrification is the top priority. But the second thing I want to say is that in terms of the opportunities for UK PLC, insofar as automated vehicles are concerned, it's not so much the finished car that we will export abroad. It's actually the capabilities that we have that are exportable. And these are, for example, 3 things. The automated driving systems and software stacks that some of our developers in the UK specialize in. So these can actually be applied along with the help of partners in other locations. And these are exportable capabilities. And we have a few national champions. I don't need to mention their names here. I think everybody in this crowd probably know them. And secondly, there are also lots of capabilities in our supply chain. I think Zenzik published a good report last September on the UK supply chain capabilities in this area. A lot of these things also are exportable. And the third thing is exportable know-how. For example, engineering services that we could actually export abroad to help other locations and other countries perhaps automate some of their passenger services or automated delivery services or even logistics and off-road applications.
Okay, thank you very much. And I was going to turn to you, John, next. Specifically first, to pick up a question that comes to my mind about this electrification, connected and autonomous. I just wonder, in my mind's eye from what you were saying, I'm thinking electrification, well, there is your sort of, that's not your game changer, that's your evolution. And the self-driving, and indeed what comes from that into the worlds of smart mobility, well, that's a game changer. Am I getting that wrong?
No.
Oh, good. That was a nice short answer, everyone. Lesson there for the rest of the panel.
I think there's 2 elements to it. The technological change impacts in a different way to the connected change. So one would enable autonomous, the other enables connected and data services. So without the electrification, without all the sensors, and there could be up to 2,000 sensors on a vehicle these days, all that wouldn't happen without the investment in the vehicle itself, the hardware. I think what we're lacking at the moment is all the access to the sensor data about what's going on. It's beginning to open up. So, as I said, we've now got access to harsh braking data. So not normal braking, but abnormal braking data, which allows us to understand, get extra insight over and above historic KSI, low-speed insurance, about where things potentially could happen. We've got access to road friction data and slippery when wet. So we know where on the network vehicles are experiencing friction difficulty, and with the recent cold spell, we can proactively advise where gritting should be. We can use national IRI data, International Roughness Index, to be able to monitor the rate of decay of every 25-metre section of road on the national network, all remotely. So this is all coming from connected vehicles. But then it gets really interesting when you start blending that with infrastructure, fixed infrastructure sensors and comms. So if you looked at air quality, we've got thousands of air quality sensors being put up at cost, which give us spot values for air quality. Well, you can now actually get air quality readings from the filters on connected vehicles to actually understand the levels of pollutants in the air from connected vehicles. That opens up a national air quality map without the need for fixed infrastructure sensors. And as more of this data becomes available, it gives us more and more insight into the mobility, into the risk for every user type, into the highway condition, and to proactively do things to keep the network running make it cheaper, use less carbon, and actually monitor the impact of making changes. So if you put a cycle lane in, well, great, we put a cycle lane in, we can count how many bikes are using it. What's the impact of that been on all the other road users? Is it actually now safer in terms of harsh braking for cars, lorries? Is it safer for pedestrians or not? So we can now monitor the impact of infrastructure change with connected vehicle data as well.
So I want to stick with you for a moment because I want to probe a bit your use of the word we in what you've been saying there, because there's we as in Geist.
Yeah.
You've got access to loads of data, which is lovely. But elsewhere we've talked about consumer acceptance,
Yeah.
particularly in respect of the driverless agenda. But I'm thinking here, there's a whole different world of consumers from a Geist perspective. For example, national highways, every highway authority in the country. Every highway authority in the country, I would say, as a driver and a road user, should be gagging for data on harsh braking and on IRI. I hope everyone was noting that down. There's a new acronym roughly once every half hour here today. Should be gagging for that.
Yeah.
Are they?
It's only the insights from the data. The data itself is useless. There's just too much of it. You can't do anything with it. And not everybody's got data scientists and big computer clouds to analyze it. Once you get information and insights, actionable insights out of it, which we're only just being able to do now, yes, there's a lot of interest. Everywhere from DFT, National Highways, Welsh Government, the Scottish Government, down to all the road treatment, the local highways authorities, the road safety partnerships. Everybody is interested in this new insight that's available and qualified because of the quality of the manufacturing of vehicles, the consistency of the sensors. So the data you're getting is consistent and it's trustworthy. And that's the big difference. Yes, we are seeing a lot of insight from people we'd have never thought of before as well. I mean, the police incident investigation teams were really interested for obvious reasons. Ooh, you've got data, can you tell us what that car was doing? No, it's all GDPR compliant, it's all generalized, you can't track it to a vehicle or a person. But what it did give them was an indication of what normal looked like, and if the vehicles involved in the incident were traveling abnormally. That's really useful when you're investigating an incident. So there's lots of uses from everything from the winter maintenance, from the safety, from the impact side, you know, understanding the value of all the different types of signage. I mean, we've just done a national survey of all the signs in Wales. You wouldn't believe how many different signs there are.
Oh, I would. And they're in.
So yes,
they're in at least three
massive
languages:
interest.
English, Welsh, and the other one when people translate it wrongly. But actually, that's a brilliant Radio 4 segue that I didn't set up because I'm going to come to you from the National Highways perspective because you talked about things at the roadside. Now, colleagues of yours have previously said to me that they can see a day when we won't need great big sheets of tin beside the road with road signs on them that will just become obsolete. Shortly after this event finishes, I'm going to go to Victoria Station and like everybody else there, I'm going to look up a great big departure board, even though every one of us has got a smartphone. Smartphones all running very slowly because there isn't enough connectivity because lots of people have got their smartphones on. Nevertheless, we just like something about that being up there. So I just wonder where you think National Highways thinking is on this journey of how are you really going to make valuable use for me, for the trips I'm going to make on your network, out of this growing world of connectivity and perhaps autonomy?
Good question. I will talk around the business as much as you will, and there will be contradictions as there are in the public space as well. People like to consume information differently. That's just something that, you know, we find ourselves in modern society, but we've got to be able to make the data available to be consumed in a variety of different ways. So we're talking about as I said in the presentation, we currently go on that business to customer model, or actually we want to move certainly in this first instance to a more business to business to customer model. Also, we're not going to be taking out our road infrastructure anytime soon. It can't happen overnight. There will be, to some extent, I don't want to use the phrase lowest common denominator, but in order to keep our customers informed, society has to have moved on to a point where they're consuming their information differently. So we're not going to be taking things out or in the next 10 years, but we might stop putting new stuff out in the next 10 years, or 15 years. That's the research to be undertaken.
10 or 15,
but
those of you taking notes.
There's a rough line in the sand that we may, around 2035, be either removing existing stuff or certainly not putting new stuff in. That's being currently kicked around at the moment. But 25, so a long way off from now, we can certainly see over the last since.
But what about the data exploitation side of things? So before I come to you, that's about the information to me, but I'd like to think.
We've got to get smarter at the way we utilise data, certainly internally as well, and to some extent we are a well-funded organisation, so we do have data scientists and things like that can start evaluating and picking apart connected vehicle data. But then we've also got to describe that it's not always a one-size-fits-all model. So GACE would do a huge amount of and provide a service to us, for instance, in that asset management space. But there's some things we can pick apart and or get for free. There's the European Data for Road Safety Group, which has mandated that certain use case safety data has to be released by vehicle manufacturers to road authorities, so around harsh braking, accidents, breakdowns, wrong way driving, that kind of thing. That kind of information to enhance our operational capability is really important. But that's the carrot, or no, that's the stick. We'd like to start engaging with OEMs and start finding where the carrot is and where we can start that collaboration piece, because their customers are actually our customers as well, and actually we all need to start appreciating that the more connected we are, the better for everyone.
Okay.
And that is the royal we.
We're going to come back to this again, but James.
I wanted to follow up on what Andy's just been describing, but also your point on Victoria Station. So when I get to the station, I look at my phone and I've got the Trainline app, and it tells me a predicted platform number. And I can take the risk. I can go and join on that particular platform, or I can wait for the validated data set that Network Rail or whoever's operating Paddington Station provide me with. And I think that's very, very analogous with what we're describing here, in that it's what liability can you associate with that particular data? Mm-hmm. What's the purpose of that being collected? What's the purpose of it being applied? So this morning, Peter, and I can't even see where Peter is now, but I'm sure he's here somewhere, was talking a lot, he's right at the back, he's waving at me, was talking a lot about the liabilities associated with the use and misuse of different data sets. We could achieve a lot in a more systems-based approach by linking together different data sets from different systems. We're looking at, for example, connected speed limit data, for instance. But if that can be relied on, then that's fantastic. We've been doing a program with Nissan called Serve City for the last 2 3/4 years. I can talk about it because it's publicly funded. And that's all about using roadside infrastructure and the data from that as an external sensor to the operation of the connected automated vehicle. It's taken those nearly 3 years to get to a stage where they absolutely trust the data that's being provided, because we've got joint specs, etc. That's a very, very long time, and certainly not a scalable model. That's proved out a concept. But to get to that stage of understanding what that data's been generated for, how that can be applied. Is it routing? That's probably okay. Mm-hmm. Is it safety critical data? Probably not okay. Understanding what the purpose of that generation was, and understanding how we map across the data collected by GACE, for example, to what people might traditionally use with roadside sensors, and validating that is a big part of that process. How much can I rely on that? How much am I prepared to gamble liability?
Okay. So, checking, I'm not seeing a load of hands go. I'm seeing one hand go up there, and I'm gonna segue into it while the microphone makes its way up, because I'm going to ask very quickly a question of Fred, because it strikes me, if I'd joined this event at lunchtime, A, I would have been very well fed, but B, I would be under the impression that this was mostly a connected vehicle conversation, and occasionally we talked about driverless stuff. Those of us who engage with the Centre for Connected and Autonomous Vehicles have observed it's the Centre for Autonomous Vehicles. It's not really taken that much interest in the connected side of things. If you're here from CCAV, feel free to jump up and defend yourselves on that one. But my impression from very long conversations about mobile signal connectivity and the complete failure of the Department for Transport and CCAV to do anything about it in relation to electric charge points is that CCAV has been almost encouraged to focus on the A side of their work. Am I being unreasonable in thinking that? What's your instruction to your arm's length body?
Yeah, well, actually, Michael is here and might want to say something by way of rebuttal.
How's life under that bus, Michael?
But genuinely, go on.
For the sake of the video, he's nodding vigorously. Carry on.
But so, I mean, I think, well, two issues. One is the connectivity one. You know, it's kind of a long-standing, you know, broadband connectivity issue that we have kind of nationally on the kind of DCMS side of the government house, as it were. In terms of the kind of fundamental question around the connected, the C in CCAV, I mean, I think it's a fair critique. I think perhaps when we've talked about the economic benefits that I talked about in my presentation earlier, we think about it in terms of car exports and perhaps have done not as much in terms of thinking about the connected side of things, the data that comes from that, and exploiting that as a commercial opportunity. Partly because it's not the thing that's on fire, and often in government we're dealing with that first. It's sort of the opportunity that comes next. That said, I think there's enough in the you know, CAN policy document that we published towards thinking about actually how that's an opportunity, and also the kind of security around the data that, you know, industry and our partner organisations collect, such that it is then handled in a way that instills consumer confidence in sharing that data.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to come in a moment back to Woolwich, because I'm very interested in this consumer angle. But I did see a hand go up, and it's Mr. Graham.
Hi, I'm Andy Graham of the Transport Technology Forum, also a trustee of the Reece Jeffreys Road Fund, also a highway engineer, and also a petrol head. I'm pleased you said what you said, Steve, because that was going to be kind of my point. We've now got connected and autonomous, and for many years I've said those two words shouldn't be put slightly close together. The point I was going to make, thanks very much to John for pointing out all the data that's coming from new vehicles. We've got 33 million cars and 3 million vans and a few million trucks on the road, and lots of us are working on connectivity solutions that can impact all of those. In fact, we connected up 3 veteran cars on Steve's London to Brighton run last year, just to show that connected vehicles don't need to be new ones. So I'd just like to reflect on the fact that there's lots of solutions, I think, for connectivity for roads, but also the point that it is difficult for us in the connected and not autonomous space to get funding because the emphasis is very much on autonomy. So maybe there's a point there that we could try and redress that balance. The other point I was trying to make, we heard this morning about low-hanging fruit, all that kind of stuff. There's lots of solutions out there at the moment. I work on eCall, which many of you know has been mandated for 4 years now. We still can't get hold of the data from it. We still can't exploit that for safety. There's a lot of things we could do for all road users to make them better, whether they aspire to get a new car and can indeed afford one. And for those of you who know, my Volkswagen ID3 has still not arrived 15 months after I ordered it. So those of you who've bought into electric vehicles, some of us haven't got them yet, but also vehicles of all types, road users of all types as well.
So out of that, I'm going to pull one thing first, specifically, which is from a Geist perspective. So, I mean, you guys are in it, let's be clear, you're a commercial business.
Yes.
So you're doing worthwhile things, I know you're chief executive, but at the end of the day, you've got to make money.
Yes.
Which you are, it sounds like, from the exploitation of connectivity.
Yes.
So I'm just wondering whether, and again, you have the man from the ministry sitting next to you, who I think he said earlier has literally more money than he knows what to do with. Are you, I think, was that right? Sorry. Are you engaged sitting there thinking, well, I wish we had a slice of all of that autonomy money? Or are you actually thinking, no, look, we're just getting on with this. It's fine. Opportunities presenting themselves left, right and centre. National highways, gagging for our services. It's all tickety-boo.
It has been hard leading the way when there hasn't been a lot of funding. But we do believe that connected vehicle data will open up so many new things. And this year, we were selected as one of this year's cohort for the Zenzik CavCam funding, which has enabled us to now test fully with SMLL and with UTAC Millbrook push notifications of these risk hotspots to fleet-driven vehicle, and the RAC supplier of their system is one of those that's testing it for us. But similarly, testing the push notifications back to autonomous vehicles. So it's quite ironic that connected vehicles are giving us insights about risk on the highway when combined with historic and infrastructure data that allow us to push notifications back to connected vehicles so that they can modify their behaviour in respect of pedestrian hotspots, cyclist hotspots, motorcycle hotspots, harsh braking hotspots. So it's a virtuous circle in that data from vehicles is giving us insights when combined with other information that we can then push back to make the whole road network safer. But yes, it has been difficult with a lack of funding, but combining it in that way with autonomous allows us to get to funding.
Okay, so a thought there, particularly for Zenzik and CCAV colleagues to take away. I promised I was going to come back to...
Peter's got a question as well, he's waving his arms.
Oh, so he is.
It's been very interesting listening to all of the speakers, and I have to say it's great to be hearing all of the progress that's being made. However, one of the things that occurs to me is, as a potential impediment here, is we're quite altruistic in the way that we think data should be used. We think that data should be made available, and it feels often that what we're talking about is creating dysfunctional markets where we're expecting people to pay for things that they're not benefiting from. So increasing the cost of a vehicle so that it can collect data. So I like the case thing that we're actually using sensors that are already on there, but I already have an observation from a number of third parties on there that they only make available those parts to an OEM that they have contracted from, not the full set of things that they... So there's already discussions taking place there. So to get the benefits out of this, I wonder if the panel would comment on the extent to which we are going to have to find ways to overcome this dysfunctionality in the market, where we're expecting those people who benefit not to be those that pay.
Okay, thank you. Wow, altruism versus commercial interests. Who would like to go first on that, David? David? Yeah. You're speaking on behalf of the automotive sector here.
This is why I'm trying to choose my words very carefully.
Well, indeed, because I'm sure what you're about to say is that the automotive sector is almost entirely altruistic, but just with a bit of money making on the side.
There are altruistic bits, which Andy just mentioned, European data for road safety, which vehicle manufacturers need to provide, obviously free of charge for the greater good of everybody. I remember years ago when I first joined the SMMT, there was lots of talk about data being the new oil. Yeah? Whether it's still the new oil or the established oil, it's up for debate. If oil is getting unfashionable, is it anyway? But that's besides the point. I suppose in terms of data, I think we've got to look at whether it's data for safety and the greater good, or data that is of commercial value, that is monetizable. Yeah? If it's data that is of safety and for the greater good, a lot of these are already being looked at, even at the European level as CITS fora. And most of these are going to be shared on a free of charge basis, because they are being used for the greater good and being pushed back to other users, for example. But there are also data that is actually monetizable. And I showed just now a slide where the vehicle could be servitized. So it's about servitization of the vehicle. You have the core asset in the middle, and you wrap a suite of services around it. Some of those services are monetizable. And you wouldn't expect people who have actually built the data architecture to be giving it on a silver platter to any Tom, Dick, and Harry. So more likely than not, there ought to be some B2B relationship for the sharing of this data. And sharing is not a problem, but it's quite unlikely to be free of charge if there is a commercial value to this data. But I appreciate the point that there's lots of data out there. Determining the insights, as you mentioned just now, John, the insights that could be derived from the data is actually key. Not just having ever more data as though you're going to build a treasure trove of data. Data itself is actually, data per se, data itself is quite useless. Yeah. You need to derive insights from the data, and that's the bit that sometimes may have commercial value.
Data's like money, it's useless unless you buy something and do something with it. But John, I want to come to you here because specifically, we know that a lot of data is already being generated. We've been hearing about that from vehicles that you're getting your hands on. How?
We pay for it. It's as simple as that. We don't look at the generic floating vehicle data that you can buy modal average speeds, volumes of traffic, quite generic data. We specifically work with either OEMs or sensor manufacturers, which are pan-OEM, for very specific data feeds that we can apply to insight for a customer for a specific use. We tend to work as GAST on highway condition, highway infrastructure, and insights about the highway. So when it comes to road safety, combining things, including harsh braking data, including road condition data. When it comes to winter maintenance, it's around the slippiness of the surface, the condition of the surface, and then the maintenance schemes which need applying to that, or when gritting needs to happen. And as these new connections allow us access to more sensor feeds, we can build out more specific insights related to the highway. And that could be around specific types of vehicles, for example, because the first connected motorbikes are coming about next year. So getting data from motorbikes and blending it with data from cars, data from e-scooters, data from push bikes. Because once you've got insights not only from vehicles, but all the modes of transport on the highway, you're then building up a clearer picture of the total highway use. So things like detecting potholes from the tyres on a car and suspension units is pretty useless, because motorbikes and cyclists go in different places. So you can't say that that road's safe when you're only monitoring a 200mm strip. Plus, unfortunately, if those other road users have an incident, it's more expensive to the government and the local authorities because the injuries are more severe. So having that more holistic picture of data sourced from multiple types of vehicles allows these greater insights to be created.
Okay, so unless anyone had anything specific on that, Fred, I was going to come back to you with one more thing, and then I'm coming back to you. That's all right. On the world in Woolwich. Because I'm just thinking back now, again, evolution, revolution. I'm thinking of the history of seatbelts. Great invention, 3-point seatbelt, big tick to Volvo. Did the rest of the industry start fitting these things without being forced to do so by regulation? Absolutely not. So perhaps down this path, I think coming out of this morning and this afternoon, there is a mix here of, if you like, enlightened self-interest because there's a commercial case for releasing data, but particularly I think in the driverless realm, it's going to have to be a stick as well as a carrot. And yet, I happen to know, even though you've got Grant Shapps now, you're having difficulty, everyone's having difficulty getting the law in place for what was called automated lane keeping, what probably should be motorway driving or something now. Does that need to develop some regulatory framework specifically for data feature in, again, your to-do list for CCAV and indeed for your team in Bays?
It does, and I mean, in terms of the legislation that we're looking at, in a sense, we already know what we want to achieve, and it is, you know, those strategic objectives and outcomes in terms of giving consumers confidence as well as the producers confidence around handling both of the technology and data. I guess, though, my sort of take, actually, thinking about some of my other industries, is that we're actually quite far ahead in terms of the regulatory framework overall and operating environment. If I think about what we're trying to do in aerospace, where we're looking at hydrogen-fueled flight, you know, we don't have anything quite like the architecture that, you know, we've spoken about today in terms of the test beds that we have available, in terms of what we've already put down in law in terms of safety. So, you know, we're ambitious, and we need to sort of get that legislation through in this Parliament, per the slide from SMMT, in terms of kind of how quickly we need to move to be able to achieve the objectives of the CAN policy paper. But at the same time, I think we should be confident as an industry that, you know, we're quite far ahead of the frontier when I compare it with some of the other struggles in the manufacturing sector altogether.
Thank you. So, I'm going to go to a completely different place as we come to an end of the afternoon, which is about, we've heard various mentions, I think it was in your slides, about public acceptance, about how did the public feel about, particularly driverless. I think connectivity is different. But I'm just wondering, from the Smart Mobility Living Lab perspective, I've been out to Woolwich, I saw one of the delivery vehicles trundling around a couple of years ago. As part of the work that you guys have done in providing a test bed, has any of that addressed how, if you like, the rest of us in the environment feel about these vehicles passing through, but there's nobody in the driving seat? Is that something that's been part of the SMMLL perspective?
Yeah, so it's been interesting so far. So we've had, as you know, lots of trials where it's been with the safety driver and so on. And it to a certain extent, it's the, okay, how does it all feel and so on. And the feedback is almost all universally, it's a bit mundane. Boring's good. I think if it's too exciting, that's probably a bad outcome. But I think until people start to see that as part of their day-to-day life, once they start to use it as a real service, that's where the real opportunity starts to come to understand what that means for people. Once you put somebody in a fairground ride, effectively, it's only getting them so far with that experience. Once it starts to become a lived part of that experience, that's the next step. So for us, it's the opportunity to start to look at those more advanced trials with drivers out that provides the real opportunity to start to test people's experiences. And I think the thing which we should never forget is that that needs to be embedded in real use cases, real business needs locally, rather than something that's a kind of hypothetical idea that's been dropped in and said, play with that for a while. It's a far more sustainable route to start to understand what people really need. So that's the approach we're taking at the moment, to understand local community needs, local business needs, to build up that sense of where that opportunity might lie.
Okay, and last up, just very briefly then, I'm going to come back to you for a moment, David, just to get a sense of the auto companies themselves, the extent to which, having foisted these wretched touchscreens on us in every damn car we try to buy, which is a terrible idea, just for the sake of the video, do they care about what we actually want, or are they just saying, well, we'll just shove yet more tech on these vehicles because we can?
You're asking about those touchscreens or about self-driving vehicles?
I'm asking about how the industry worries or doesn't about the consumer, the public acceptability of this tech. Let's start with automated lane keeping, because we know at least one manufacturer is selling that in the European country, as you said.
Good question. So 3 things. So firstly, industry acknowledges that there has to be a program of consumer education, which is why under the auspices of CCAF, and good things coming out from CCAF, we have supported a group called the Automated Vehicles Driver Responsibility in Vehicle Education Group, a mouthful, so we shorten it to AV Drive, which involves a number of stakeholders, including the RAC Foundation, including insurers, safety groups, the fleet sector, for example, to come together to develop a program of education. So we have been actually working in the background to do that. We haven't unleashed anything yet because there are no self-driving vehicles on the roads yet. So we're looking for the right time to launch a suite of collaterals, beginning with a toolkit for public education. And the second thing is that acknowledging that industry, car manufacturers, so this is for passenger cars, car manufacturers themselves have responsibilities, which is why in November last year, we published an industry guiding principle, a set of guiding principles, which our members, all the car manufacturers support, to uphold responsible marketing when selling automated driving features. And for example, it is about not overselling those features. If they are not automated driving features, if they're only ADAS, please don't call them automated driving. And that's what we agree. And we publish those set of guiding principles. Hopefully, those non-SMMT car manufacturer members will also uphold these principles. And thirdly, and this is going back to what some of the speakers said this morning, notably Nick Reed and Trent Victor. There's nothing like experiencing it yourself. Before I jumped into a vehicle with a pre-production version of the ALKS, this was a few years ago, I had this abstract idea of how ALKS might work. Yes, it's under 60 kilometers an hour on the highway, but I wasn't particularly sure, particularly when it comes to the transition demand, the request for me to retake control, until I experienced it myself. Went into a car belonging to one of our manufacturer members and put into evening rush hour traffic on the A9 Autobahn, just outside Munich, and I experienced it myself. When you've experienced it yourself, it no longer becomes abstract. You see exactly how it works, and you decide for yourself whether you're comfortable with it or not. And since then, I knew exactly how it worked, and I could vouch for it because I tested it, and I felt comfortable with it. So similarly, I think Nick probably alluded to this morning with the Gateway project that he was leading. When people experience these vehicles, they get a better idea of how it works. It goes beyond the abstract, and they know that actually, yeah, it's actually quite benign, it's quite safe, it's a non-event. If it's non-event, it's good.
I agree. We don't often say that to each other. As you can tell, splendid. In that case, everyone, I think I only have 3 duties left in my role here. One is to invite Frances to come back up to say a tearful farewell in a moment or two, and while she's doing that, second is to invite you to say a big thank you to our afternoon speakers and panel. And third is to thank all of you for coming along today. We hope you found this interesting, thought-provoking, in some instances challenging, plenty of things to follow up, plenty of things for our panel members to follow up, but thank you very much.